the other piece now is we're going to move into the Q&A. And so I just want to kind of do a quick recap. Questions in the chat, and Michelle and Ann are going to go back and forth asking your questions. And at the same time, right now, we're probably only going to do 3 if we have time. And feel free, both Sheriff and Chief, to kind of, move through them, and then we'll try to get through as many as we can. And then I heard that you guys will still be a part at the end when we'll open the floor for more questions. So that would be great. So at this time, Michelle, do you have a question to?
I do. I have a question for Sheriff Atkins, and it is regarding the jail. Is there funding in place to build a new jail? And where does the money come from? Is it from our tax base? Is it from the county? Is it coming from the state? And is that money available?
Great question. The answer to that is no, the money is not available. We are not at a position yet to even determine where that money is going to come from. The county council will make the decision if they're going to put that to bond or what it is they're going to do to move forward with that. But that sets calmly and completely in their hands to determine how that's going to be. What I might say is, when I mentioned the jail of 300 to 350 people, Clark County did through CFAC, for over a year, a group of people came together to determine the size of jail needed for this county. And if we had the proper resources for the mentally ill and the drug and addiction issues to not be incarcerated, because the jail is really not the place for them, we would need a jail for the 500,000 people we have that houses a minimum of 850 people. Again, that's if the resources are available. And if the resources currently aren't available, that number would just go up. So this is something that I've been working on for the last 6 years with the county to try to push forward whatever avenue they choose to go in to get the funds necessary to provide this facility that is much needed for this county. And again, I don't say that because I believe we need to lock everybody up, but I do believe that we need to, the people that we do put in our jail need to be held in a safe and constitutionally safe jail so that their rights are protected as well.
So just to confirm, the money comes from the county and you're getting no assistance from the state for a new jail?
Not at this point. There's been no money identified for how we're going to move forward. And that is a key issue that we continue to work on, trying to get the answers out of the county council.
Thank you.
And Ann's going to have the next question, but before
Yes.
that, we've been talking, Ann, just a second, we've been talking about how can we do more? So Sheriff, what you're saying is maybe our voice could be very important to let our county councilors know.
That is absolutely true. You, everybody on this, everybody and your friends, yes, they need to understand just how important this is, knowing that they're going to be coming back to you directly to say, well, how are you going to pay for it? And are you willing to do that? And that is not the 100%, a jail is not the answer to the problem, but a jail is a huge piece of this problem and accountability to the victims and to the safety of this community. And through police reforms, and I know that they'll be talking about that later, I think we're going to have some good movement in the legislature this year coming up that is going to help that and help clarify some issues and in areas that really handcuff us and keep us from doing our job.
Thank you. Thank you. Ann, continue.
Okay, so this could be maybe a quick answer from both Chief McElvain and Sheriff Atkins. How important is the illicit drug trade in this explosion of property crimes? So maybe Chief McElvain first and then Sheriff Atkins.
That's a great question. It's kind of difficult to answer, right? Because how we've changed our laws in the state of Washington, it's a little bit more difficult to measure. There's some that contend that a number of crimes are associated with illicit drug use and activity, right, to support a habit. If I'm not a functioning addict, in other words, if I'm not a person that holds a whole full-time job and I just recreational use, I then need to somehow support my habit. And oftentimes that's done by illegal means, right? It's either robbing somebody, it's breaking into property, stealing things, and hopefully being able to fence those or pawn those off for funds to be able to support that habit. I'll stop there and let the sheriff pick up.
Well, I would echo what James said. That's right where I would have went in talking about the obvious need. And as we legalize more drugs, and some of those new bills allowed for possession of, meth and heroin and everything else that is terrible in our community in terms of the health of those people that are taking those drugs and needing those drugs, do go out and commit those crimes. And what I would also say is in the system and the way it is now, and the numbers that you hear from me and you've seen from James are only accurate to that's reported. And I'll tell you, there's no doubt in my mind that there's a large number of crimes that you guys see every single day in your communities that are not even getting reported to the police because we are all understaffed. There's nothing we're doing about them anyway at this point. And people are saying, why do I even call? And they're not even going to waste the time to go on and do an online reporting to report their theft. So these numbers are a lot worse than what you're even seeing.
Would you
Dr.
encourage,
Michelle.
would you encourage people to still report? I mean, would
Absolutely. We still need the data, and those people in place that need to be pressured to make sure that we make some changes, they're going to need to see those numbers and not just hear the echo and the anger. We can show and prove to them these increases. And so, yes, it's very important that they continue to report them.
Okay. Next question.
Let me just jump in real quick.
Yeah.
So there's a couple ways that we measure crime, right? What's reported, to law enforcement, it gets uploaded to the FBI, right? To WASPIC here in the state and to nationally to the FBI. And, so the data that I was shown was, this reported crime that it has been counted. Now there's another way that criminologists will measure crime, and that's through the National Crime Victimization Survey that goes out to households. And we see when you compare against the FBI data to National Crime Victimization Survey, there is a difference in reporting, right? Because people will tell in the survey that they were a victim, but they didn't take the time to report it to law enforcement. Oftentimes, the underreporting is an indication of a couple things. One, trust in law enforcement that you can do something, right, about this. Or, is it really that significant that I need to take somebody's time? Law enforcement's busy. I shouldn't report this. They got, bigger and better things to do. To the sheriff's point, absolutely report. That only helps us refine how we utilize our resources to put them when and where crime's occurring.
Very good. Thank you. I have one last question for the both of you. I'm going to ask that you keep it very short. We have heard that there is a shortage of officers and deputies across Vancouver, Clark County. What are your current numbers and how short are you, and how soon until we see new patrols?
James, you want me to go first? What I can tell you is that the state of Washington historically is the worst state in the United States for the number of cops per thousand. And I know there's multiple ways to measure that, but that's the leading measure. Let's just use that one. And in Washington state being the worst, there are 39 counties in the state of Washington, and Clark County is the worst staffed sheriff's department in the state. On average, you should have 1 to 1.25 officers per thousand in a county jurisdiction, not necessarily the city. Clark County has 0.67. We are at numbers that when I worked here in the 80s that we had. I have less than 150 deputies to work all of Clark County 24/7 and provide a full functioning police department. And we have been trying for years to increase that number. And not only that perfect storm I spoke about earlier, you could tell me tomorrow that you would pay for 100 more. I can't get them in the door because we can't be competitive in the market with signing bonuses and things like other agencies in our jurisdiction do. And when people look at that, they don't think to come to the sheriff's office. They're going to go where they can get the signing bonuses, more money. And so the sheriff's office is struggling terribly right now, and probably the worst I've seen it in 42 years.
Thank you. Chief?
So we're authorized 234 sworn officers. We run on average about 215, 217. That changes almost weekly. To Jill Brown's comments earlier, last year, 2020, we had the greatest number of people exiting our department. We had 22 officers, 22 sworn leave. A lion's share of them were retiring. But to Jill's comment, we did have a few people that totally left the profession of law enforcement while they're still relatively young in their careers. And we also had a few people that were moving out of state to where they believe that, to some degree that the community has greater support for law enforcement. That said, we did hire 25 officers last year. Sounds like a net gain, but we lost 22 fully functional trained officers and replaced them with 25 that need to be trained. And that takes about a year to get them up and running on their own. Fortunately, I'm grateful to my council and city manager, very supportive to the police department. Not only have we been authorized for hiring bonuses, we're increasing that and to just be competitive with within our state and region. So if you know people that want to enter, we're offering an incentive of $10,000 to hire as an entry level. And then for laterals, it's $25,000 that's paced out over a 3-year period. So a couple of things that are trying to incentivize and make ourselves competitive in the market. I apologize, Sheriff. We talked about that on Monday too. But that's where we're at today. Very difficult time for law enforcement. One quick aside, right? In 1986, when I got into the job, I remember applying with 3,000 people for agencies that were hiring 3 officers that year. I had to go to Southern California. I left Northern California, go to Southern California to find a sheriff's department that was building a new jail, something that the sheriff definitely needs. And they were hiring 350 deputies. And so I got swept up in that hiring spree. It was a totally different market than it is today.
Well, thank you. And thank you guys for this segment. I know we ran that a little bit long, but like I mentioned, you guys will be available afterwards. And again, for everyone, I like to keep things rolling at the hour and a half we promised, but for our legislative panel, and if people would like to stay for Q&A, I talked with the event organizers and they're willing to stretch that just because this is such an important topic and our turnout is amazing. So please hold tight if your questions didn't get asked. And as we mentioned before, we will get in touch with you. I'm going to have Ann and Michelle put their email back in the chat because it's probably lost in there. And Eric Holmes, our city manager, did let me know that the presentation will be available tomorrow. And so if you would like a copy of it, please email Michelle, Ann, or myself, and I'll put my email in there and we'll make sure to get a copy of the chief's presentation out to those that would like it. So our next segment, we have our prosecuting attorney, Tony Golik. Thank you, Tony, for being here. And we have you for 5 minutes. Hopefully that works. So we have time for Q&A, but I will let you take it away. Go ahead.
We'll be fine. You know, lawyers will always
Hold on a minute. You sound like a robot. Could you try it again?
Robot?
Yep. Turn off your mic and then turn it back on. Let's see what happens.
No.
Still there. Okay, why don't you?
Exit and right back.
Yep. And then following Tony, we'll have Corporal Kenton that's going to be talking about what our police officers are experiencing in the real world out there on the beat. And depending on how quickly Tony can come back, we may just jump right into that to keep things rolling. So we'll give Tony here just a few seconds, and hopefully the robot voice will be gone. Here we go. Hopefully everyone's used to this now, 2 years of Zoom, always some kind of surprise.
Okay, I'm back. Any better?
Sound great. All right, you're on. Tell us that joke again.
Yeah, the joke was, lawyer always talks way shorter than the cops, so, it should be no problem timing wise.
Perfect.
I'm going to jump right in. First, Ann and Michelle, thank you very much for organizing this. This is exactly what needs to happen in our community. We need to be talking about these issues so that we can get some movement to occur. So thank you very much for getting this going. Jill, thank you very much for being here today and your comments and for everything that you're doing. Just really appreciate you being here and your heartfelt words. All right, I'm going to jump right into a couple of very specific things that I think need to be changed. One, with respect to legislation, there's been discussion about the last session and things that were done by the legislature that made it harder for law enforcement. Jill talked about 1310, and specifically, it's that the piece of legislation that made it unlawful for law enforcement to do what's called a Terry stop, which is basically a stop and detention, an investigative detention that is backed up with a reasonable suspicion, less than probable cause. 1310 changed it to law enforcement officers had to have probable cause, which is a higher level of proof, to detain somebody and use any force at all to detain. So that was a huge change. The law of the land in the United States had always been, if law enforcement had reasonable suspicion, less than probable cause, they could detain somebody and use some force if they needed to if the person tried to just take off, to hold the person, to do a brief investigative detention so that they can investigate an ongoing crime. So that's, the kind of the big one that I think needs to be changed back. Law enforcement needs to be able to have that ability to do that Terry stop, that stop and frisk investigative detention without the full probable cause. And they need to be able to use the least amount of force necessary if the person won't comply and the person just tries to take off. So that's the big and I think really obvious legislative change that needs to occur. And I feel like there's a lot of agreement, I think, that needs to be changed back. So that's the the one that I think has really hampered law enforcement's ability the most. And then the local issue for property crime is our jail. It's our jail before COVID, but now during COVID, it's a huge issue. And the sheriff hit on it. Chuck and I have talked about this. Chief and I have talked about it. We're all really, really frustrated with this system that we have now, where pre-COVID, the jail could hold, comfortably about 600. Well, not comfortably, but reasonably about 600 people, and that was kind of the average jail population before COVID. So when you had somebody that stole a car, they'd get arrested, they'd get charged by the prosecutor's office, and a bail would be set that was a reasonable bail based on whether they had criminal history or not, and they could be held if the court found that they were likely to not show up again, or they had significant criminal history. The court could set a really quite high bail and make sure the person was going to be held pre-trial. We are in a situation now where the max capacity for our jail is like 340 people. And the average daily population for the jail now, right around 340. It goes up and down 10 or 15 people. But we're in a situation where just a few weeks ago, we had an outbreak of COVID in the jail, and the jail commanders were asking the judges, the prosecutor's office, the sheriff's office to get together and talk about ways to let more people out of the jail, which of course, the sheriff and I didn't want to agree to. Fortunately, that COVID outbreak, the sheriff's office was able to, I think, do a really good job and get that one under control and get the COVID numbers in jail back down very low now. But we're in a situation now where, like that case that Chief McElvain was talking about, where somebody is out there and they've, stolen mail from a bunch of mailboxes, probably done a bunch of property crimes. They get arrested by the police who are out there doing their job and doing a great job and working really hard to try to, address these property crime issues. They get arrested, they get charged by the prosecutor's office, and we're aggressively charging those cases. But then there's no room in the jail because the jail is full of violent offenders and sex offenders. The most serious cases are the ones that the judges are holding in jail on very high bails. And the judges, the Superior Court judges, are in the position where if it's not a really serious crime, they have to release the person and give them a future court date and hope they show back up. And oftentimes they don't show back up. And oftentimes they commit another crime while they're out pending a crime that they've already committed. And they get arrested again, and the judges can set a higher bail, but they can't, the judges are really limited by that jail capacity because the Superior Court judges are hearing the same thing that the sheriff is telling you tonight, that there's not room in the jail because of the requirements for social distancing, lack of staff that Chuck has on his team to staff the jail up at the rate that it needs to be staffed. So the jail it has become a critical issue in our criminal justice system. And that question that is before this group tonight, what are we doing about property crime in Clark County? The jail is the issue. The jail is the issue. Serious crimes, serious violent crimes, sex offenses, those folks are getting held in jail. They're getting charged, we're not at a crisis level on those, but on these property crime cases, these are serious cases. Car theft cases are serious cases. Burglary cases are very serious cases. We need to have a justice system that allows for accountability, that allows for those folks to be held when they need to be held, and that has room in the jail. It's not an easy fix. A big piece of this is the COVID pandemic. It's even worse today than it was a couple weeks ago. The Clark County Superior Court judges just put a halt to jury trials again through the end of this month, which makes it much, much harder to resolve cases. We can't take any cases to trial now for at least the rest of this month. So it's hard for the prosecutor's office to go in and really argue for high bails and have people held when the Superior Court judges are hearing at the same time there's not room in the jail. So that's the issue. That's the thing before us today in Clark County. Property crime is a very serious issue. We all know property crime is on the rise in Clark County. I absolutely want to thank Chief McElvain for showing us the big picture, that those of us that do this all the time are aware of those, but we are seeing clearly a tailing back up of property crimes in Clark County, and you're feeling it in the community. It's real, and I think we have a lot of good cops out there that are responding and doing what they need to. We have an auto theft prosecutor in the prosecutor's office that does just auto theft cases. We were actually able to get a grant a couple of years ago to add a prosecutor to do just auto theft cases. And we've assigned additional prosecutors to do those cases as well. But we're certainly seeing an influx of property crimes. And all of us in the criminal justice system are frustrated at this point that we're really in a situation where we're having a hard time holding people accountable for these serious property crimes. So, like I said, I told you I'd be more brief than the law enforcement. I knew you didn't believe it.
Well, it's because it was just you. So here we go. Tony, thank you so much. And you will stay on for the Q&A. I do want to let everyone know, we will be stretching this a little bit. I mean, we got such great information here. And I'm already getting text messages and messages telling me, don't end it. We need to hear from everybody. And so I do want to let everyone know, we're going to have Corporal Catton come on in just a second. And then that'll be followed by our panel of legislators from Olympia who will be speaking with us. And we will be keeping them shorter than even Tony, but because there's a group of them, but we do want to hear from them. And then we do want to open the floor for Q&A. I would also like to, again, point to the chat. That's where we're hoping you continue to put your questions, but also there's a lot of great information that is being shared with each other in the chat. So feel free to take a look at that. I also included my email. If you would like the chief's presentation, I will forward that out via email tomorrow to everyone that emails me for it. So without further ado, Corporal, take it away.
Okay, good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes, excellent. Okay, just because my name is probably the one that you don't recognize on the list of people, I'm just going to give you a quick introduction. I just hit my 17th year in law enforcement. I've been with Vancouver PD for 8 years. I came from a large agency with higher crime, so that's where some of my perspective comes. The last 6 years previously to last year, I worked full-time in the VPD training unit. I was the use of force master instructor, so I taught all things Fourth Amendment, all things use of force. Last year, I went back to graveyard patrol in West Precinct. This year, I'm in day shift patrol in East Precinct. So a lot of a big stretch of experience there. And I apologize. I'm used to teaching cops in person, so I use my hands a lot. I noticed nobody else did tonight, but that's me. I am grateful to speak to you tonight. I have skin in this game. I am a City of Vancouver resident. My children go to Vancouver Public Schools, and I'm experiencing this along with you as a citizen, also frustration from my professional career. So I've been asked tonight, specifically verbatim, to not sugarcoat it. Some of the things may be contrary, some may be anecdotal. I don't have a bunch of stats to go off of, but I'm going to give you my experience. I'm going to give you my observations in the field right now, and then I'm going to give you my take on the new legislation. Understand that I'm one of the people within the department that teach that legislation, that understand the legislation more, even though most of us don't understand it, which we'll talk about. I was heavily involved in 2 legislative sessions ago, I-940, which was the police training bill. So I understand some of this stuff, and I hope to be able to answer some questions. I'm sorry, I just took some notes because I'm kind of near the last part here. Okay, I want to talk specifically about 1310 and what it has done to our law enforcement officers on the street. With all respect to our elected representatives, I'm not sure if you weren't fully educated or if you didn't understand the difference between reasonable suspicion and probable cause when this law was voted on. This is day 1 of the police academy. Reasonable suspicion and probable cause are the bread and butter of law enforcement. 1310 has effectively taken out reasonable suspicion, and I'm going to give you a little lesson here just for a second, okay? So the way things work historically, and it's interesting that Chief McElvain showed you that chart because in 1985, the case Terry v. Ohio, which set into motion policing in our modern era, was adjudicated by the Supreme Court. And what it said was that officers, when they had an articulable facts and circumstances that would lead a reasonable officer to believe that crime had occurred, was occurring, or was about to occur, could physically hold on to a suspect, almost like a timeout, while they discovered or investigated further if crime had occurred. Our officers, and the way 1310 is written, has effectively turned a Terry stop into a Terry request. And let me tell you, criminal types are not complying with our request. Right now, without probable cause, which is essentially, I can break it down to, if I saw a crime happen, right? That would be probable cause for me in the moment. Right now, I can ask somebody to stop with reasonable suspicion. And if they say no, give me the middle finger, run away from me, drive away in a car, I cannot physically stop them. The frustration that we are getting from citizens, specifically, that's how Michelle and I met, was on a call. And when I explained to her, even if I would have been present and I didn't see the crime occur, I could not have chased after this person to detain them. Now, I don't always agree with auto chases because there's a lot of danger involved. You have to understand, property crimes and chasing people in cars is a bad combination, right? But there are greater factors that go into play there. And I just hope that in these next legislative sessions, the representatives will educate themselves. I have spent many hours at CJTC, which is our Criminal Justice Training Center. I am a certified master instructor through CJTC. There's about 60 of us in the state that do only use of force and Fourth Amendment, which is search and seizure. That's all we train, is use of force and Fourth Amendment. We just recently met about 3 weeks ago, and CJTC came out in the first 5 minutes and said, "We know you're all going to ask about 1310. We know you're all going to want clarification on this. We cannot give it to you. The governor's office won't give it to us. The AG's office won't give it to us. And we cannot get true answers as to what the legislative intent is here." So officers are very pragmatic. We're not going to go with legislative intent. That's one of the reasons that you've seen a decline in proactivity. We are going to go with a black and white of how it reads in the law. You are not going to have officers overstepping and using force. I've had several, since I moved to day shift, you can imagine it's probably an older crowd of police officers. I've had several come to me and say, "I don't even know how to be a police officer anymore. I'm unsure of what our rights even are when we're catching these, when we're going out and doing policing." Some have stopped being field training officers because they don't feel comfortable teaching a nebulous bill that or a nebulous laws that we don't even know how to follow them yet. So what you're seeing is that bill coupled with other things, anti-police sentiment, low staffing numbers, which we can talk about. It's already been talked about. Fatigue within the profession. You're seeing a direct result of July 25th, which is when 1310 came into effect, at least on a street level. I'm trying to think if I want to show something else here. Chief McElvain has talked about staffing. I don't know anything about funding for staffing, about city council approval. All I know is about the staffing that we have on the street. And I can tell you directly, when I started here in 2013, it was very rare. I'm talking once or twice a year when we had a drive-by shooting. When I worked graveyards last year, it was a every other week occurrence. Street robberies did not occur on a regular basis, and now very frequently street robberies are occurring. And that's just where somebody's on the street, give me your whatever, right? And then you have to look at staffing. So I'm not here to complain about staffing or anything like that, but do you know how many police officers you have working in the city at any given moment? Do you know how many police officers are in the field in the middle of the night in case something happened? And that would be something to really look at. In my opinion, and in the vast opinion from our line officers, with the new style of policing, and you have to understand this, with the new style of policing, specifically 1310, enhanced supervision, the idea that we would have to use the least amount of force, which I do want to talk about in a second, rather than reasonable force, which has also been changed. Regular calls that 2 or 3 officers used to handle now take 5 or 6 officers. So if you have a couple major things happening and you have more officers there, and I do believe that more officers creates accountability within law enforcement. It creates opportunities to de-escalate. It creates an overwhelming force. I really do agree with this new style and new tactics but it requires more people, and we have less people. And those that we do have there are working a lot, and we are tired. We would like nothing more, because contrary to what suspects will tell us in the street, we did not join because the police force because we were picked on or because we wanted to have a heavy hand. We joined because we want to help our community, because we have the capacity to view these violent and disgusting things and then go and help people. That's what we want to do. And our hands are being tied. They are truly being tied. I hope that this group collectively will move forward with this. I saw some comments in the chat. What's our goal here? Well, our goal can't stop right here, right? Our goal has to keep moving forward. And in my opinion, it would be severely changing or repealing 1310, allowing for us to use force, reasonable force, not the least amount of force. How do you define the least amount of force? How? Respectfully, Prosecutor Golik's least amount of force might be different than what's in my head. It needs to be a reasonable force, which was also set in 1985 by Graham versus Connor. There's been a national standard for police use of force since 1985, and we have followed it.
We have about 1 minute, if that's okay.
Okay, I'm near completion. I hope that Michelle will jump in. We kind of talked about some things, and if you want to jog any of the things that we talked about, we can do that. My email will be open, as well as everybody else's. But I just want to tell you, and this may be the first time that Jill Brown has heard this, but Jeremy was a good friend of mine. We did all this instructor stuff. He was with me for the last 6 years on this stuff, right? I know a lot of county guys, and I know every single VPD person because I trained them for 6 years. I can tell you that your police department in the county and the city are full of benevolent men and women who have your best interest at heart, who follow the law, who will play within the rules if given a new rule set. We just have to know what it is. And right now, it is so up in the air that we don't know what the rule set is. In fact, similar to what Jill said, the criminals are being empowered. We know this. You know how I know this? Because if we try and stop 10 stolen cars, do you know how many drive away from us? At least half. But that's not the crazy part. The crazy part is normal citizens that I'm stopping for a tail light out are now taking off at 100 miles an hour. And we have never seen that ever. So I apologize if I've overstepped. I show respect to my leadership and my representatives. I'm giving you my anecdotal and my observation of all of this. And I work East Precinct day shift, so I hope to see some of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Corporal. And thank you for that. And I know we did tell you to be straight up with us, so we do appreciate that. And again, we're going to go over. I hope everybody's okay with that. I hope our legislators are okay to stay on. And I'm getting texts from some of them who are like, hey, I'm getting on the call. So word's already spreading about this event. So that's wonderful. So really quick, we're going to open up just 2 Q&As for this segment for Tony or for Greg. So Michelle, do you have a question?
I do. I'll ask one to Greg. What role does methamphetamine and fentanyl come into play with the guys that you're picking up for the car thefts, the home invasions, the more serious offenses where people are being held up at gunpoint?
Once again, I don't have statistics in front of me, but I will tell you observationally, it would be strange if 10% of a lot of this crime isn't involving specifically methamphetamine. Fentanyl is becoming more popular, right? Drugs are involved in a lot of crime, and I'll just echo what the sheriff and the chief already said. That is 100% true. However, drugs alone don't create a victim, correct? Mm-hmm. So really, I think a focus should be on victim restitution and victim advocacy rather than trying to put somebody away for simple possession for a long time. That's my opinion, but I'm telling you, when I go to somebody, a victim, and I want to help them, their well-being, their restitution should be a priority in my opinion. But to answer your question shortly, methamphetamine, huge in our community.
Okay. Thank you.
And Ann, do we have a question?
A number of good questions are coming in, but I think some of them are going to be answered in the legislator portion. So I think our time would be better spent just going right on to the legislators because they have so much knowledge on these topics.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're going to move into our panel, and here's how it's going to work, just to kind of lay this out. We're going to have Representative Stonier is going to open to give us a little background, just really briefly, 2 minutes. She has a guest on that she wants to introduce. And then we're going to move to Representative Harris. He'll have 3-ish minutes, but that'll probably be 10. I'm joking. And then Wiley will join us, and then Linda Wilson, and then finally our Senator Annette Cleveland. So let us begin with Representative Stonier.
Thanks, Jim. I 100% promise I can be shorter than Tony. I've been practiced at it for a bit. I just want to say that it's incredibly important for this type of forum to not only happen this evening, but also to be a continued conversation in our community. The conversation in the chat and on screen has been both informative and also helpful at this point in time. We were not sure. My senator and my seatmate in the House have commitments working on your transportation package this evening. And so being concerned that they would not necessarily be able to join the whole time, I asked Chair Goodman, Roger Goodman, who is the chair of the House Public Safety Committee, to join us for the evening so that he would be here to first and foremost listen to Clark County. And secondly, to take notes and to take your feedback back into our work. So he's here this evening. I want to thank Roger for that. And our staff are also on the line, sure to take notes from this conversation. Again, this is important for us to be in a listening stance, but many of the questions that you've had have not only been addressed in upcoming legislation, and absolutely, Jill, want to thank you for our time that we spent talking about this early on, because that has been a huge impetus for us to start to get to work on this as we know we've needed to. I absolutely appreciate the comments about hoping that legislators educate themselves. As a teacher who felt that the legislature was not educated about what happens in schools and understanding the loss of faith in a workforce, I think that this conversation is incredibly important, and this is a really great way to rebuild that trust. Very happy to be here, incredibly heartened by the participation from Clark County and from Vancouver tonight. Great to see you all, and I will step back into my listening stance. And I know that Representative Harris and I have had some conversations about funding for the jail. We have strong joint feelings about that, and I'll leave it to him to address that, and want to say thank you again.
And Representative Stonier, there may be questions too for you when we get to that. So thank you again for being here. All right, Representative Harris, it's all you.
Well, thank you. And if the good Representative Goodman wants to speak, I will honestly be happy to turn over some of my time to Roger, because Roger Goodman is truly very involved in this, far more than Representative Harris is, quite frankly. And Roger, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything at all. And if not, no problem.
Yeah, I got to unmute myself there. Well, thanks for putting me on the spot there. But honestly, I've been in listening mode for months now. I literally had to put new tires on my car. Didn't make it all the way down to Vancouver, but I've been up and down the I-5 corridor to sit in person, not Zoom meetings, but meeting with chiefs and sheriffs to hear what their concerns are, and where the ambiguities are in the law, and what adjustments we need to make. And we've heard these common themes that we've heard tonight. In two areas in particular, you've heard about this. One, and we have already introduced legislation. I've already held hearings in the committee yesterday. So the process is underway now. The first is about the non-criminal work, at least to attend to mental health crisis calls in particular, people suffering in our communities who are a threat to themselves or others, but it's about behavioral health. We didn't amend those statutes, but it wasn't clear enough. And so we're now making explicit reference to the situations where police can go back to the great work they were doing to assist fire and EMS, to render life-saving measures, to help people who are in crisis, bring them into facilities to be evaluated and treated. and do all that good stuff to help protect juveniles, going to a home where a child is being abused and stand by while that child is removed. So all sorts of situations where it really wasn't clear, and we're going to make that clear. The second is what we've been talking about in criminal matters, criminal investigations, this question of reasonable suspicion versus probable cause and when force can be used. Now we have enacted in 1310, and I believe it was important to enact 1310 because we've established for the first time a uniform statewide standard. It was different all across the state for the use of force, what's appropriate, and when it has to be proportional and has to stop when it's not necessary, and we call it the reasonable care standard. So it's important that we put that standard in place so that force, if it's excessive, there will be accountability there. And this is responding not to some vague idea, but to some really unfortunate circumstances, not just across the country and in Minneapolis and so forth, but here in our own state in a number of different places where particularly people from marginalized communities have unfortunately lost their lives in interactions with the police. And we listened to the families and those communities and responded to that. Now it's a question of balancing what law enforcement has told us, that particularly in serious crimes, we're talking about murder and armed robbery and aggravated assault. And I'm most concerned about domestic violence. Domestic violence is an epidemic in our society, and police on a day-to-day basis are dealing with mental health crisis, and then domestic violence. And I want the police to be able to detain physically, to interact, to restrain the movement of people when they show up on a DV scene, because they haven't figured out who's done what to whom yet. It's only reasonable suspicion. So we are structured. I introduced a bill to deal with this, to lower the threshold to reasonable suspicion when force can be used. And again, force can only be reasonable. It can't ever be excessive. But the bill was savaged from both sides. Both the police and the community groups hated it. So wondering whether that bill is going to move forward. So I'm listening, and we're going to respond to maybe come up with another proposal about these so-called Terry stops. We didn't outlaw Terry stops at all. Terry stops, these detentions, the lawful detentions are still allowed. It's just the question of what if the person attempts to flee that detention? That's the key. That's what I'm hearing from law enforcement. Not to use force under any circumstances, but what if the person attempts to flee that detention? That's what we're focusing on. And then the other thing is, what is force? We need to define force so that the police have certainty that, like a pat down, for instance, that doesn't cause pain. That ought not to be part of the use of force. If you're going to pat down for weapons in particular, if you're going to be really physically restraining somebody or causing them pain, well, yeah, then that's force. But we want to make that clear and want to set that definition in law. And so we're underway now. And again, I've been listening to and really doing our best to respond to the concerns of police out there. Police have the toughest jobs, right? You run into the danger for us, and we really respect you for that. And so we're trying to find that balance of letting you do your jobs, but also holding accountable those who use excessive force and engage in all sorts of other misconduct, and uphold the policing profession. It's been under attack for years now. And so by creating more trust between police and particularly marginalized communities, we hope that will calm things down, and it's good for public safety in general. I could go on forever, but just want to let you know, we've listened, we're responding. Not everybody's going to be happy, right? This is the legislative process, and we're going to do the best we can to thread the needle on this. But I'm working really hard on this all day, every day.
So Jim, that's the ranking member over public safety. Roger, I want to thank you honestly very much for, I imposed on you, but I also want to thank you, Roger, for wearing a tie at this late hour and being fully dressed the way you're supposed to, buddy. Good job.
It's 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day for me anyway.
So Jim, Jim, that was my time, and thank you so much, because I think that's more important than me, actually. Thank you.
I appreciate
I
it.
should make a correction there. That was not the ranking, that he's the chair.
That's right. I'm used to
He
saying
didn't say
ranking. He is the chair of public safeties. Excuse me, and
I'm
don't.
kind of the criminal justice guy in the legislature. So if you have questions, go ahead and ask me.
Thank
So
you.
to continue, thank you again, Representative Harris. To continue moving forward, 3 minutes to Representative Wiley, if you would like to share as well.
Thank you so much. And I sincerely hope that we'll have more of these forums. I am here to listen. A lot more of what we do in the legislature is fixing complex unintended consequences of important things that if they were easy, they would have been taken care of at a local level. And doing it right is important. My highest priority this session, and somebody just said, what are your 3 highest priorities? Well, top of the list is getting this right. I spent a lot of my adult career working with crime victims. I came real close to ending up being a police officer at a small municipality. I see that there's a lot of things we need to put resources into, and the jail numbers certainly got my attention. We may need to jointly join hands and do a community-wide campaign. And if we can get a new jail, I'd like to see a part of it for lower level offenders, so that there are firm consequences, and redirection and public shame and a lot of things that are kind of old-fashioned, and restorative justice, consequences, and making things right and coming back into balance with our community. That being said, I know that in any culture, in any group, there are going to be people that have behaved badly. And I've had constituents and friends that have had concerning incidents with our police, who I greatly respect and feel allied with on most things. So listening is important. Listening right now in the very first week of session, when we're going to be hearing very heated comments from a lot of different directions, is really helpful for us in trying to do the right thing. And I think that this is the beginning of a journey that has a lot of complexity. We need to do things about resources. We need to make sure our jail isn't our biggest mental health facility. We're putting a lot of resources into community-based mental health services. We have a national drug addiction problem, and we've tried to hold some pharmaceutical companies accountable for that. So we all acknowledge that this is a multi-leveled problem, but to have a safe community, we're going to have to be partners. And building trust means listening to everybody, and it means addressing real problems. Even if we haven't experienced those real problems personally, if we know they're there, we need to pay attention to make sure that this is a safe, welcoming community for everybody. I think I need to do more listening. And like I said, getting this right is my highest priority. I'm not on Roger's committee, but I have a great respect for the work that committee has done, and the fact that there have been parents of murdered children and working police officers that have been involved in this discussion for upwards of 8 years. We're not done.
Wonderful.
We're not done, and I'm here to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I appreciate that. And restorative justice, that is a key. Thank you for sharing that. Let us now turn to Representative Linda Wilson is with us, and take it away.
Thank you, Jim, but I'd like to correct you. I'm Senator.
Senator Wilson.
But that's okay.
Like the old days. Sorry.
That's all right. Hey, I really want to thank you all for coming together tonight. This is amazing. I had no idea that you'd have this many people here. I appreciate the candid conversation that I had to hop off for a short period of time. But it's been very interesting. I know there's frustration. We hear that in Olympia. I don't know how many emails I've gotten on this alone. And I do want to say right off the bat, I'm pretty candid myself. When we passed 1310, there were a whole lot of these issues that were brought up on the Senate floor, and they were ignored. So we said, this is what's going to happen, because for years I was on the Law and Justice Committee, and I have a good relationship with our sheriffs and our deputies and our police. And so I know what's happening, and it was very frustrating, to say the least, when this bill passed. And on top of that, we had a double whammy, because the Blake decision came down from the Supreme Court, and the legislative fix wasn't a good fix, at least as far as at least in our opinion. In this last week, just a few days ago, and I know this isn't supposed to be political, but I have to tell you at least where we're coming from. We have a plan that we just brought out where we've got over 40 bills to address human trafficking and domestic violence and property crimes and Department of Corrections and State v. Blake. We have bills to correct all of these. In fact, one was dropped just a few days ago where several of us signed on to, which was actually just repealing the entire 1310. So we'd like to have that happen and start over again and do it right this time. There's a lot of, as you all know, I've been very involved with domestic violence in the Tiffany Hill Act, and I've heard from people across the country looking to get that bill or that act passed in other states. And I have to say, Representative Goodman was very helpful in getting that bill through. That was an amazing work, a bipartisan effort. It was wonderful. And I actually have a few bills that expand upon that for helping with domestic violence. But I want to tell you that there are a few bills coming up that increase the penalties for assaulting a law enforcement officer. We just had that one come through and just signed on to that one today. I have different information as far as crime rates that different than the chief came up with. Ours came from WASPIC, and I have that they're 25-year highs. I mean, that's what I've got. And murder is up by 80% from 5 years ago here in Washington. Rapes up 40% for 5 years. In 2019, there was most rapes on record since 1995. Aggravated assault up 50% from 5 years ago, and most since in 2020, the most since 1995. And then I have the property crime has ranked second highest in the nation over the last 5 years. So we've always been very high. Washington State has always been very high with property crime rates. And so, you know, there's just a lot of there. Oh, and I have to tell you, there's another bill that also just came out today, because Washington ranks last in the nation for law enforcement officers per capita. That's not something that we should be proud of. There's a bill that that was dropped today by Senator Holy, who used to be policeman. And basically what it does is it allows for 0.1% of state sales tax to local governments to hire more law enforcement officers. But this would be a credit against the state sales tax, so there would be no increase to any consumers. So, and then it would be required to hire law enforcement up to at least the national average per capita, which is 2.4 per thousand. And if you're at the national average, the local governments would use the funds in ways that they deem best to reduce crime. So, and by the way, there is a Democrat bill that I also signed on to that they're trying to fix in the Senate. And Senator Cleveland and I both have signed on to that bill. And it is also a fix to 1310. So there's a lot of work to do. And we're all here to be supportive. I absolutely love the fact that Jill has been so strong in what she's doing, and I absolutely applaud her. She's amazing, and we needed a face for this. Something like Tiffany Hill, right? We needed to have a hero to get that bill through, and we didn't want her death to be in vain. And so I certainly hope we can do the right thing here and make Jeremy Brown proud. So I want to thank you all today for being here, and my door is always open, and thank you. And thank you, Tony, for what you're doing. I appreciate your door is always open for me.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you so much for that. And
Thanks.
my apologies. We're now going to turn to Senator Cleveland, but just to make it fair, Representative Cleveland. And she's going to close out this panel, and then we will open the floor because we do have a few other representatives on. So we'll see how our Q&A goes and how people feel with time, but hopefully you can keep it to 3 minutes as well, and take it away.
Thank you, Jim and Michelle and Ann. I want to specifically begin by saying thank you for this tremendous opportunity tonight to listen and to participate in this discussion. Given that we are short on time, I'm going to be brief, but I want to share a few thoughts, and want to begin by sharing that public safety, I believe, is a shared responsibility. It's one that we all need to have a hand in. And I think that just the turnout tonight, this meeting, this discussion really is a good first step in all of us working together to ensure that individuals and our neighborhoods, our communities are safe, because safety should be a right for each and every one of us, for all. Just a brief couple of thoughts around the work of the legislature last year. We passed a number of reforms. They were truly aimed at building safe and healthy communities in our state, and absolutely ensuring that our criminal justice system is one of equality and equity for every single person. And as has also been touched on tonight, we work to address the break in trust between communities and law enforcement, but in addition, also provide more tools and more support to our law enforcement officers whose jobs have become increasingly difficult. And as we've already discussed tonight, we expect our officers to respond to behavioral health crisis calls, be counselors, be teachers, while also helping people in need and enforcing our laws. It's important, I think, also to acknowledge that, and it has been mentioned briefly tonight, that over the past 4 years or so, the stress on families, the stress on individuals has increased exponentially. And the pandemic in particular has brought more fear, more uncertainty, more instability, and a great many people simply don't have any hope. They're pushed to their limits. And those are the symptoms then of what we see, those things that are most visible, an increase in the need for mental health services due to more people suffering behavioral health crises, increase in theft and crime, increase in assaults, increase in homelessness. So these challenges are really difficult. There aren't easy answers, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep working towards solutions. So I'll conclude by saying, those of you who know me know, I truly take to heart my responsibility to listen, to understand the needs of our community, to carry those needs forward to Olympia. And I've talked with many of you over the interim. I know that there are really sound, really good, really productive suggestions for change that we can make to legislation that we passed last year in order to better clarify the intent of some of the reforms. And I've carried some of these different perspectives, some of these potential solutions forward to Olympia in an effort to advocate for refinements. As Senator Wilson mentioned, I've been working in the Senate with Senators Vandeweghe, Mullet, Lovick, and others on legislation to hopefully take forward some of the ideas that I've heard. Pleased to share that I am a co-sponsor in the Senate Senate Bill 5577. It's aimed at addressing some of the important changes we've talked about tonight. And I would invite you, if you're interested in looking at that bill, to go to www.leg.wa.gov and click on bill information and put in that bill number 5577, and you can read the full policy bill there. Is it a perfect bill? No, because no bill's perfect. And that's why I hope that each and every one of you will stay in touch as this bill and others are considered in the legislature this year. And we truly work together to build the most sound policy we can to continue moving forward. So
Thank you.
know that I'm ready to continue to listen, take forward our different perspectives and search for solutions together. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you again for being here. Just a couple of things before we move into our Q&A. First of all, thank you all for being here. And we have over 50 different businesses, community groups, organizations that participated tonight that are here. And we just want you to be aware, this is really just the beginning. We've seen so many questions here coming through in chat. I've been receiving text messages. This is going to be, we're looking at getting the county. I mean, it's very obvious from what we heard from the sheriff today. We need the county councilors, and we got to get this group. We need 250 people to talk to them, and we need to talk about the need for a jail. We need to understand the process of how we can make that happen. We got to work with our legislation to get them to see if there's funds that they can work together. And that's what I think is so beautiful about today. All of us here together for this cause is just awesome. And for so long, I think we've been living in silos and fractured, and it's great to get everybody here together. So with that, Michelle and Ann, we're going to turn over to Q&A for our legislators. And really, if any of our speakers from today, there might be any direct questions. I do want to remind everyone, because we have so many people here today, email Ann, Michelle, or myself your story. So I'm seeing a lot of people talking about their businesses being defaced, feces in their doorway, all these different, set fire. We heard about Esther Short Park last night. Send us those stories, because our senators, our representatives, they want those stories. They want to hear what's going on. So please get those over to us. And again, if you'd like copies of any of the material, feel free to email me, and I'll make sure I'll talk with Senator Wilson. And also I do have the chief's presentation that I'll get out to everybody. So with that, let's turn it to some Q&A, and we will try to close here soon, just because I know it's getting late and we're already 20 minutes over. So, which I'm impressed, we're only 20 minutes over with this much that we've packed into these 2 hours. So Michelle, do you have a question to begin?
I'm not sure if this would be for the legislative panel or is Tony Golik still on?
Still here.
Yep, okay. So this was an interesting question. I watch day in and day out as people walk out with merchandise and groceries from our local Safeway and Fred Meyer stores. I'm starting to wonder what laws have been passed or put in place that doesn't allow a store owner to refuse service if they think the person coming in is unsafe or on drugs. So at what point did the owner of the shop refuse the right? There's that sign that we all know so well. I refuse the right to serve anyone. So when there's a safety issue, how is it that these folks are still coming in to the local markets and just walking out with merchandise?
So no change in the law that I'm aware of that would address that issue. If somebody commits a shoplift is still the same crime that it was 5 years ago, and those are the sorts of cases that are not being addressed at the level that they were, a few years ago. But those are for the reasons that the sheriff and the chief and I talked about, not with respect to changes in the law. So if somebody commits a shoplift, that's still going to be a third-degree theft. The shop owner has every right to trespass somebody from their store, place of business. So no change in the law that has taken away, shop owners' abilities to trespass folks and like I say, that conduct that you're talking about, shoplifting, same crime today as it was before.
Okay.
If I could jump in and comment on this, there's legislation before my committee. I'm going to be holding hearing next week. There's two different types of shoplifting. There's stealing a tube of lipstick or some gum, and that just happens. And it's billions of dollars to retail across the country, and it's a problem. But the big problem is organized retail theft.
Mhm.
People going in and they've got jackets with, like they're stealing valuable stuff. And the theft statute in our state, unlike most other states, does not allow for a loss prevention officer or law enforcement to intervene in the store before they leave. Because once they leave, the getaway car is waiting for them. And so the idea is to amend the theft statute to allow for intervention where there's intent, where there's clear intent to steal. And then we can stop them before they go out of the store. There's a lot of concern, however, from marginalized communities about profiling in stores where they might be unreasonably targeted. And so we're going to have to find that balance there. But I'm going to have a hearing on this bill next week. And the other issue is when people steal in this organized way from, it's criminal enterprises. This is what they're doing. Then they sell it online. And that, if we can get cracked down on that, then they're not going to be able to sell it anywhere. The diapers and the Tide Pods and so forth, and all of the valuable things. So we're looking at it from a number of different angles. But yeah, this is a big problem: organized retail theft. Trying to crack down on that.
Thank you.
Jim, may I suggest, there are so many great comments in the chat function, and I think the lateness of the hour precludes really our going through those. But I would like to suggest to Michelle, myself, and others that we form a Facebook page under the heading Vancouver Citizens Against Property Crime, which is sort of what we call ourselves, where we can kind of use that as a way of asking questions, getting information, telling everyone about our next Zoom call, which I think one of the things I've learned is this shouldn't be the last one. So Vancouver Citizens Against Property Crime, and Jim, with your expertise, we could set that up and begin really addressing some of the substantive things that are being brought up in the chat function. And we want to hold ourselves accountable as well as everyone else on this call to follow up and not make this is the beginning and not the end by any means. And the stakes are so high that we can't fail. So we have to follow up. And I would suggest in that manner.
Yeah, and also I know the name makes it sound like it's just the Clark County. But yes, I would like to make sure everybody feels a part of the group and can be welcome, because as I mentioned before, I spoke with families that were posting all over next door about how they're just getting completely, broken into, stolen items, lost a car, and they live in the 4th Plain Forward area. And they're very frustrated because, we're talking about people of color, we're talking about Latino, we're talking about mixed families, and they're sharing how they feel that they're the ones preyed upon first when we start to defund the police. And so we need to hear from everyone. Everyone has a voice, especially in our more underserved areas of our city, and hearing from them directly too, because they, I was put in my place by a few of these people saying, certain organizations think they speak for us, but they don't. We are being victimized by criminals every day, and we need something to be done. So I thought that was very eye-opening to me, hearing that directly from these families. And I know Jill Brown is working on also being able to make sure more and more people's voices can be heard in this avenue. So maybe there's things that Michelle and Ann, you can do in conjunction where everyone can kind of work together here, because we want everyone's voice heard and everybody has an opinion on this. So with that, I think you're right. This has been a late night. Thank you all for coming. We should have said it was from 6 to 8 because then we'd be 2 hours or 2 minutes before closing out here a little bit early. So thank you all for coming. Send your questions in to us and we will keep this moving. And again, we appreciate all of your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.